Thanks for attending. I'm going to talk through a bit of background to Tin Can and Open Badges, so two new specifications that are obviously generating a lot of buzz in L&D circles. They both have a shared background, so there's a lot of discussion as to do we use one or the other, or do they are they complementary? So I'll do some kind of basic intro really to Tin Can and Open Badges. It's nothing in depth. It's really kind of for a beginner's guide, if you like, and then looking at the end around how they can be utilised, whether they are complementary or whether they are competing. So a quick look at the actual shared background to these two specifications. They both kind of come from the idea that that learning happens anywhere. So that your sort of traditional learning technologies in the 20th century, you might have a learning management system, some kind of portal, and you'd expect people to come there to do their learning, to do their organisational learning. Well, that's not really how it works in reality. So you've got people doing, in the real world, going to all sorts of different places to engage in learning, and the same for assessments. So they may be doing, work-based assessments or exams, and it's not typically the type of thing where someone goes to an actual system to do. Even when they are doing online learning, there's not much of that in a learner's wider kind of their sort of wider learning experience that actually happens on an organisation's LMS. So you've got all these tools like YouTube, Khan Academy, iTunes U, and revision apps and things like that people will be using. That none of that is gathered together on the LMS. So how do you track all of that kind of all of those sorts of experiences? So really, where these two sort of differing specifications have come into being is from that recognition that you've got all these wider learning experiences, but how do you pull them together? And they've both come at it from different angles, really. So Mozilla, who are behind Open Badges, you'll know Mozilla from the people behind the Firefox web browser in particular. But one interesting thing they do, which we'll come on to later, is that they are developing a kind of a curriculum of web literacy standards, which is not the kind of stuff that people will go through in school or college. But there are lots of online resources on this kind of material. But how do you kind of surface the fact that you've done that, or been accredited or whatever for doing it? So that's where badges come in. It's some giving you a sort of means to visualise the fact that you've achieved these skills and competencies that you might not be able to do through traditional means. So that's more around things like sort of skills and competencies and accreditation. Tin Can comes at it from a kind of different angle. So ADL are the people behind it, who you'll know from the people who have developed the SCORM standards quite a long time ago now. That's all sort of funded by US Department of Defense, the ADL body, and they're coming at it from this similar angle that all these wider experiences that people have in the workplace, but how do you bring that together? And what they've done is gone out to they actually put a tender out to say who can help develop, rework SCORM from the ground up, if you like. And if we were to rebuild SCORM in the 21st century, how would we do it? Let's not be constrained by what SCORM does and extend it, but just rework it from the ground up. So they went out to tender and asked for who could actually build a first draft of a specification, which a company called Rastisi did, and then put that out to the community to get feedback and to revise it, and that became Project Tin Can. So there are these two very different approaches, but with that kind of common background. So we'll look at both of those in a little bit more depth, and looking at Tin Can first. Just on the terminology here, there's a lot of talk around Tin Can API. You'll also hear people talking about Experience API. They're essentially the same thing. ADL call this Experience API. That's the official name. When Rastisi took it on and the community got involved, Tin Can became kind of the working name, but it stuck. It will work itself out, and at the moment people call the same thing either name, but in time that will work itself out. So I'm just going to use the term Tin Can. So in terms of what it actually does, there's people kind of talk about it, or the specification kind of deals with it in these 4 layers. And the first one is that it just moves us on from the world of SCORM. So it's, if you're familiar with SCORM tracking in a learning management system, it will be things like not started, completed, passed and failed. So very, very basic level of tracking that someone's done a piece of e-learning. Tin Can moves us far beyond that kind of model, so it's about much wider learning experiences, and we'll look at how those kind of statements are constructed in a moment. Like I say, on layer 2 there, it allows you to move beyond e-learning, so it is to track anything. It might be that you've read a resource, read a journal article, or gone to a seminar or conference session like this. Any type of learning experience can potentially be tracked through Tin Can. As long as there's knowledge of it in some other system, it can be pushed out into the learning record store, which is your sort of Tin Can repository. Importantly, it frees data from the learning management system. So if you have an LMS in your organization, a learner can't take their record with them, usually, when they move on to another workplace, or when they move from college, if they're using a Blackboard or a Moodle, and then they move into the workplace, they can't take that easily with them. Part of the Tin Can spec is that your learning record store must allow users to export their data, and just so they can extract all of that and potentially put that into another LRS, learning record store, in the future, in their next workplace, for example. And then finally, it enables merging with performance data, which is kind of the holy grail really for L&D professionals, is tracking your learning outcomes and how does that impact on behavioural changes. And we'll look at a few examples as to how that can actually take place. So I'm not going to go into all the sort of details of the technology, but in terms of how the sort of concept of Tin Can API is that you've got 5 examples of learning activities along the bottom there, and essentially they push Tin Can statements into a LRS, into a learning record store, which is really just a repository of data, just a big database. And those statements are really, really simple statements. They're just in this noun, verb, object form. If you use Facebook, you'll be familiar with this. Mark posted a photo, or Mark commented on someone else's discussion. So noun, verb, object, and that's applied obviously to learning activities. So just as an example, if in the healthcare compliance, for example, we've got 6 learning activities here that someone might have to do as part of a learning program to achieve compliance in whatever topic. So traditional piece of e-learning there, which would normally have been tracked in a learning management system. They might have then to do a workshop, face-to-face workshop, view a video, listen to a podcast. So all these types of learning activities that are potentially being pulled from different places. So your video could be getting pulled off YouTube or a streaming media server. Same with your podcast. Mentoring session with a line manager, for example, or a subject matter expert, which again would have been recorded somewhere. And then finally, the actual achievement itself, which is passing the compliance course. So all those different activities that you build up towards your actual achievement can potentially then send all these types of Tin Can statements, which are, as you can see there in the middle, into a learning record store. From the learner's point of view, that learning record store would be in the form of an activity stream. So again, if you're familiar with sort of social networks and things like Facebook, you'll be familiar with that kind of basic activity stream kind of formats. But it's just all of the different, quite granular, sort of detailed level of data as to what learning resources or learning activities the user is engaged in, not just the fact that they passed a compliance course. We talked about the performance data earlier. I've got a few examples of how that could be surfaced. This learning record store is an actual application that we're building at the moment. So these are sort of mock-ups of, that's exactly how it's going to look. And in the customer we're building this for is a retail customer, so they'll be able to do this kind of graph, which is tracking the blue line, which is your course completions, against the black line, which is your sales data from your store, in this case Brighton. So you can start to see some trends emerge, hopefully, as people complete a course in a retail environment, there you hope to see your sales going up as a result of it, so you can start to see that kind of impact of the learning. Similarly, if you applied that same approach in financial sector, if people were doing, say, international accounting standards compliance course, you could pull in from your regulation breaches system, because all of these kind of regulation breaches are tracked elsewhere in a financial organisation, and start tracking course completion of standards compliance courses versus your regulation breaches coming down. So just sort of mapping that kind of trend analysis as well. And then lastly, in some manufacturing or engineering environments where health and safety breaches are tracked in other systems. Again, it's because of the Tin Can statements are so simple. as long as you've got control over that other system, you can configure it to send tin can statements into the LRS. So we can track course completion versus, hopefully, you would hope, injuries coming down if someone's done a health and safety course. So pretty simple graphs really, and if you're familiar with Google Analytics, that interface is just borrowed from there. It's just 2 data points being mapped against each other. There are some challenges with tin can. One is around self-reporting. So a lot of the early tin can tools that are out there at the moment, for example, you can get a browser bookmarklet that will put a little button on your browser bar. So if you're on YouTube, you can click, right, I viewed this, and it will send that as a tin can statement. I viewed video X. There's a problem with self-reporting in general, especially for compliance, for sort of serious use like that, if you're allowing people to actually just click on a button on YouTube or wherever and say, I completed something, that raises all sorts of concerns around sort of potential cheating and stuff like that. So our view is, if for any kind of data tracking of completion of resources or activities, that should be automated where possible. It raises a lot of privacy and ethics concerns. Obviously, we're talking about tracking a very detailed level of data about what users are doing. And it's a pretty topical thing out there at the moment anyway, with the amount of data that's tracked about users on things like social networking sites. So it's a big concern, and really it's up to the organisation to come to a conclusion about what's comfortable for them. What level of data do they actually need to track, and what level is right to track about the users, and do they need to get user permission to do that? And each organisation will have a sort of different angle on that. And then finally, those data correlations, so where we saw those graphs with different data points and looking for trends, shouldn't be taken at face value. Really all they're doing is giving you indications of this course might have resulted in injuries coming down in an engineering workshop, but it's really giving you pointers to where to look in a bit more depth, rather than drawing actual conclusions from. So, one of the reasons at Epic that we're interested in tin can in particular is that really you can think of it as a data collection standard. So it's just a way of getting all this really granular level of data about your learners' experiences into a database where you can start to analyse it. And that gives you the capability then, once you've got all that information, to do some interesting work in the learning analytics space, which is really, it's not about tracking stuff for the sake of it. If you've got all of that level of data about what learners are doing and how that maps to their outcomes, what are your most successful learners doing, then you can start to improve the learning experience for everybody. So from our point of view, getting all of that kind of granular data is quite an exciting prospect, but it's all about really about the learning experiences rather than the outcomes itself, which is where we'll go on to with badges. It's got good traction, so these are LMSs that are currently have built-in tin can support or have it in their roadmap, are committed to building it in, and the same for authoring tools. So all of the big names are in there that you'd expect to see, so it's gaining good traction in the market. So just a summary on tin can before we move on to open badges. It's about tracking the learning experience rather than just the actual outcome. It allows you to track learning from anywhere, if anywhere where a digital footprint essentially has been left about that learning experience can potentially be sending tin can statements into the learning record store. We talked about activity streams, and the user can sort of build up that picture of their learning activities over time. Frees the user data from software lock-in, which is important, really thinking at it from the user's perspective, and driving us down this road towards where we can do sort of learning analytics solutions and improve the learning experience, which is quite different really from where open badges are coming from. So if we look at open badges next, really the sort of high level kind of principle behind open badges is that they allow us to create a visual representation of learner achievements or skills or competencies or whatever. And you can kind of split them into these sort of 6 areas where they're used really. So they're about capturing the learning path. So you might have, you might not just have a badge for achieved a degree, for example, for a student in a university, but they would get a badge for every milestone, every gateway through their learning process. So each module they've completed, or particular milestones within a module. So it's really up to you as an open badge system designer to think about what are the right points at which an open badge is awarded. But essentially, onto the second point there, they're about signalling achievements that the learner has actually reached, has gained. They're used quite a lot already for reward and motivation. If you've used sort of tools like Foursquare and things like that, they've been hugely successful in using badges to reward and motivate and engage people. And it's that concept. It's introducing a little bit of kind of games-based learning really into the learning program. We mentioned earlier that Mozilla are doing this web literacy curriculum, and that moves on to the fourth point, which is about allowing us to capture non-traditional skills. So if a learner, they might not be particularly academically skilled and not have done so well in college or school or whatever, but you'll have people who are going online and doing courses and gaining important skills, and it's a way for those kind of people to surface that and to visualize that and potentially put that into an online CV for an employer or an FE provider or whoever. They're also used, the last two here around personal reputation and identity building and community building are really ways that badges are already used in online communities. Really all Open Badges does here is provide some kind of formal plumbing, a kind of a common method for these kind of sites to implement it. But a lot of sites use badging tools for building reputation. If you use forum sites or any online community, a lot of them will have prolific forum poster type badges and things like that signify your kind of place in the community, and that's where they come into those last 2 points. Some examples of badges that are in use out there already, and these are some good ones. I mean, the Stack Overflow one is a nice example. It's a programming site, so it's a particularly geeky example. But of their 1.5 million users, only 100 have attained this legendary badge status, which really shows how it can be used in that kind of reputation building sense. But a few other examples there. Mozilla Webmaker Badge, we'll look at that in a bit more detail shortly. NASA, so some big names involved in badges. Really the guts of the badge is in its metadata, and that's where it gets really interesting. So it's not just saying, right, I've got a badge in web design. It's all of that additional information that the badge holds that is of interest to potential employers and university admissions or whoever you might be targeting as a learner. So you'll have your badge name, you'll have your badge description of what it signifies, but then importantly things like criteria for what you've had to do to attain that badge, who's issued it, which is absolutely crucial. If you've been issued a badge by Cambridge University, that's going to have a lot more weight than a badge by a much lower level college, for example. So the issue is going to have a lot of weight within how badges are perceived by employers, for example. And then things like date issued and evidence. What did you actually have to do to get that badge, and how have you evidenced that you've actually done it? So there's a lot of information that you can get that typically on your badge page you would follow the link to get access to all this data if you're an employer, for example, looking at an online CV. So we'll look at a few stakeholders who are involved in the sort of badging system, as it were. The earner is obviously the crucial one, the end user, and these could be employees, they could be college students, university students, event attendees. So people, we're at LSD event today. There are some events that have already started issuing badges for conference attendees and things like that. So event attendees could be badge earners. Important thing is you could be awarded badges by multiple systems. So you might have a student VLE, you might have an employee LMS, a conference site, whatever, that are issuing badges. Importantly, though, they can be exported to a single public place, which is your backpack, as it's called in Mozilla's example of their Open Badge backpack, and that allows you to pull all of these badges together from the different systems you've been awarded them through, and then to also decide which ones you actually want to make public. So you might have, you're going for a job and you'll decide to expose badges A, B, and C to that job, to that employer. Or if you're going for a university place, you can decide to expose different badges, so you have that kind of flexibility in your badge pack. So I skipped a page there. So then we have the issuer, so that is your employers or colleges, distance learning bodies, whoever. We've got a few examples here of people who are already issuing badges. That's a small number of just some of the higher profile names, really. If you go to openbadges.org, there are some good pages on the actual companies and organisations that have bought into this sort of ecosystem already. So these are some of the higher profile ones. And then finally you have the displayers, which is the actual tools that will display your badges. So that's your LMS, your blogs and things like that, social networking tools. So those are a few examples of sites and of platforms that are already displaying open badges. I've put LinkedIn in there with a question mark on it because from my point of view, if LinkedIn were to be a displayer of open badges, that's kind of like the killer app, really. It's so many of us in the professional space use LinkedIn for our online CVs. If that were able to display badges from wherever you've earned them, that would be absolutely brilliant. And that, it's already clearly got traction among some big names, but that would be the one that kind of seals it. The reason they haven't done it yet is that they're apparently developing their own badge system that's not using the open badge architecture. Hopefully that will change. So I've left it in there with a question mark on it, and it's just as something to be aware of and to keep an eye on, really. Hopefully as open badges gain traction, LinkedIn will set up and implement it themselves. So in terms of actually developing badge systems from a sort of learning designer's point of view, there seem to be two schools of thought, really, that are developing top-down and bottom-up badge systems. So top-down, probably what we normally see in organisational learning, where if people are working towards a competency, for example, they'd have to evidence certain skills to reach out certain behaviours, and you could potentially have a badge for each behaviour. So you build up a hierarchy of badges towards working towards a particular competency or a particular learning outcome. In online communities, they tend to be more bottom-up developed. So through a process of community narrative, through discussion forums and chats, the community decides what's important to them, what skills are important to them, and create those badges accordingly. So just from looking online around who's using and designing badging systems, it's clear that there's these two kind of sort of styles emerging. This is the Mozilla example for their WebMaker program. So in their case, you've got sort of people who are interested in web design going through and earning badges for these different things like image maker, media maker, audio maker, all that kind of thing. So very specific skill sets around particular types of assets, but ultimately working towards this I am a web maker badge, which is the actual outcome of the whole curriculum, as it were. And that's the key thing people are achieving. So once they've reached that badge, that's sort of the end of their program. So that's quite a nice example of almost like a curriculum type approach, where people are getting badges for individual topics towards reaching a sort of a higher kind of badge, which is webmaker. I am a web maker in this case. So to summarize open badges, they're more about tracking learning outcomes and attaining skills and achievements rather than every single learning experience that a user has gone through to get there. But you have that flexibility as a learning designer to decide at what point those open badges will be issued. They're exportable to public backpacks. So again, it's about getting data out of the system you're in into somewhere else that's a bit more, that you have a bit more control over and can take with you. And the key thing with open badges is that's the idea that it can be accredited by someone, and that really adds a lot of weight to the issue of a particular badge. So I think that's one of the things we'll see. You might have badges issued by particular employees, but if they can be endorsed by a professional body, for example, then that will add a lot of weight and from a user's perspective, to see that, well, this is a badge worth getting, but to employers to see that, well, this is a badge that really means something. So looking through the sort of backgrounds and how both of these types of tools can be used, our view is that they're complementary systems. So just to finish on this slide, just to sort of outline the where they we see them kind of working together almost. So Tin Can is about tracking quite granular, very detailed learning experiences. Badges is about tracking the actual outcome at the end of that experience. It's about what you've achieved. They use different systems, so the Tin Can is pushing data into a learning record store, and that's all about data storage. There's nothing built into the Tin Can specification that says what you actually have to do with that learning, with that data. So we'll see lots of LRSs coming onto the market, I'm sure, that do all sorts of fancy stuff with it and nice analytics tools on top of it. But essentially, it's just a data storage repository. With Open Badges, the idea is that from the get-go, it's a lot more visual. It's about having a backpack where you can provide a visualization of those skills and achievements. In terms of what they give insight into, Open Badges will obviously give insight into a curriculum pathway. Rather than just having a CV that says, I've done a software engineering degree, it will show you what modules and what topics and stuff that you've achieved on the way to achieving that higher level degree. Tin Can API, the insights are more about the learning paths and the more detailed learning experiences, the performance improvements, how has behaviour changed as a result of doing this and doing that kind of trend analysis that we saw earlier, and which is really an enabler towards this kind of learning analytics type scenario where we can get that do that detailed analysis of what successful learners are doing and what learners who haven't done so well are doing, what the differences are, and all about improving the learning experiences for those users. So two, I think, very different kind of approaches, but from a shared background, and essentially a Tin Can, you could have a Tin Can statement for awarding an Open Badge. So I think they have a lot of potential to work together, but as both mature, we'll see where they go. Both of them have only really come to fruition in the first quarter of this year, where the standards have sort of reached version 1.0. So it's early days, and we'll see where they go, but that's kind of our take on it. So thank you very much.